record. Okay. And that I'm going to do that protocol one more time just to start off. It's 1 capsule every other day for a week, 1 capsule a day for a week, and then by the 3rd week, you're at the recommended dose of 2 capsules. And then that 2nd month is when you add the Mega Prebiotic. And it starts with a half of a scoop for the 1st week, and then a full scoop for the rest of the month. And then you add the Mega Mucosa at a half a scoop for the 1st week, and then a full scoop for the rest of the month. And so each one of those ingredients is added on to the next. At the end of the 3rd month, everything should have run out. So you're starting with 3 bottles of Megaspore, 2 canisters of the Mega Prebiotic, and 1 canister of the Mega Mucosa per patient that does the total gut restoration. And then the maintenance is 2 to 3 capsules of Megaspore per week. And that's at your discretion, really whenever it's easiest for your patient, either just on the weekends or designated times during the week. And that's our foundational protocol. Then there's some handy tools to have. If you have someone that is extremely toxic, and when you introduce Megaspore, it may cause the gram-negative bacteria to shed their cell wall, which contains the endotoxin, lipopolysaccharide, and that endotoxin, and we've got a slide that'll go over all of the different symptoms that can be associated with that. And what happens when it sheds, it can overwhelm the bowels, and depending on how much gut dysbiosis and damage there is, will determine what type of symptom a person will have. They can get diarrhea, they can get constipation, gas, bloating, breakout on the skin. It's really individual for the person. So we can deal with that in a couple different ways. The Mega IgG helps because it is an immunoglobulin. It's more concentrated than any immunoglobulins that you would find in colostrum, and it doesn't have any milk antigens to cause any problems because it's serum derived. It works to neutralize the toxins. And the Megaspore can also be, the capsule can be opened and it can be reduced in the amount of quantity so that the person can gradually work up to that first capsule. So there's a couple of things you can do, as well as if the person has a very damaged immune system and they can't handle all 5 spores, you could start with a 1-spore probiotic, which is in the HU58. It's just the Bacillus subtilis, or a 2-spore probiotic, or you can graduate from the 1-spore to the 2-spore to the 5-spore. So this is just some helpful hints on how to help some of those really sensitive individuals, which usually makes up about 20% of the patient population. But we know that that 20% very often can take up 80% of our time. So that's why it's helpful to titrate and find that 20% from the beginning. We also have an omega fatty acid, which is designed to help specifically the gut inflammation. And it has high PRMs, or pre-resolving mediators, and it has high DHP, which is not typically quantitated in other omegas. And this is a helpful fatty acid because it can convert to EPA or to DHA depending on what the body needs. And don't worry, I'm going to go through each of these in more detail. I'm just trying to give you kind of an overview to get an idea what all of these products are for. The MegaGuard, which you have already experienced, we've got some really great feedback on this. And I was unexpecting that some of that feedback would have to do with ulcerative colitis, in that because this helps with the bile flow, very often bile, if someone has difficulty or a sluggish bile flow, they'll tend to have more dysbiosis, more SIBO, because bile is very antimicrobial. And this product helps that bile flow. So when someone has chronic diarrhea, very often it's because the body's trying to flush itself from all of these toxins that are recirculating because they don't have, they have sluggish bile flow, and the dysbiosis is unconjugating the bile from removing the toxins. So the couple of practitioners that called and said that some of their real difficult ulcerative colitis patients that had severe diarrhea for 6 to 10 years, that really just after a week of using this product, it stopped. And that shocked me. But I think that really demonstrates when a very specific need for helping the bile flow. The Mega Microbalance is very helpful with Candida. And very often people don't know they have an underlying Candida, systemic Candida infection. And when you're trying to improve the microbiome, sometimes that's when you find out some of these underlying conditions. This is a different type of antifungal in that the undecanoic acid stops the hypha attachment to the epithelial cell wall. So it's more effective at keeping the roots from going down versus a lot of antifungals that work like more mowing the lawn, and it always grows back. So, and then the propolis, we've got a lot of practitioners that focus on antifungal or actually mold toxicity issues, and they find that the propolis is very helpful for those secondary viral infections like EBV. The Wheat Rescue, which I think you've also tried, we find our practitioners, once they've educated their patients on the importance of a gluten-free diet, very often when they kind of release them into the environment where there's other, they're making choices for themselves, and they go to restaurants that are supposed to be gluten-free or have gluten-free items, or they're shopping in stores with gluten-free options. Even those gluten-free selections still have about 30% undetected or unlabeled gluten. So for those individuals that are highly sensitive, this works like an insurance policy to keep the gluten and the gliadin broken down so that it's not immunoreactive. And we find that as there's more hybridizing technologies for gluten and wheat in general, more people are suffering with the inflammation from that dietary product. And then the megaquinone, like I mentioned from the beginning, this is one of our original products. It's one of my favorite. We've seen it work clinically to help reduce blood pressure, atherosclerosis, dissolved kidney stones, gallbladder stones. So you can think of this basically as wherever there is calcium in the body that is depositing and it shouldn't be there, more than likely there is a vitamin K2 receptor that is designed to mobilize that calcium or ionize it and return it back to the bones. And that's what this product does. And it's very effective at that. And we have two different formulas, slightly different ingredients. They both have the vitamin K2, but this megaquinone here has some K1 in it because the body spares K1. And then we have Phytospore, which really came onto the scene because we realized so many patients were asking their practitioners about using Megaspore for their animals. And we decided to invest in a clinical study that showed that dogs suffer from metabolic endotoxemia and that the spores are very effective at reducing that. So we put the two main spores in the product with some Pediococcus that's helpful for the skin. And then we launched the BiomFX Stool Kit in January, and it has really rocked the whole industry as far as stool testing. It's a completely different way of looking at the microbiome. It's more of a functional way of looking at it, and it's the only test that's used in medical centers, universities, research centers, and recommended for accuracy by the FDA. So we will cover that as well. We're very much a research-led company, and you can see here, these are research studies that have been completed. They're currently in the stage of being written up. We've shown that just by using Megaspore, you get 45% increased diversity. So it really dispels the whole idea with probiotics that you need to use multiple varieties and rotation schemes. And the whole point there was to increase diversity, but when you talk about non-spore bacteria, the problem is that the majority of them are going to be broken down, digested in the gastric barriers. And so there is no increase in diversity because there's no colonization of those organisms. There's only what they call metabolic signaling by the quorum sensing aspect of those. And it's only one strain, one condition, and it's only effective as long as you take those. Whereas if you have a spore that's actually colonizing, even though it's transient, it's colonizing for 21 to 24 days and making a huge impact on the microbiome environment. And that's where we focus really, is on the terrain, and improving the terrain is what is in the long run going to keep the individual healthy. We've done studies on antibiotic-induced dysbiosis, specifically with HU58, and this product, I mean, this paper, has, like I said, it is written up, and I can show you that in this presentation. But in general, there's a lot of aspects that each one of these individual spores have, and we'll cover that. Antibiotic-induced dysbiosis, effective, and this is really interesting here. We're the only company that's really done a SHIME, which is the synthetic gastrointestinal tract study on the effects of glyphosate and then the repair aspects of the spores. So that's very hopeful for individuals that live in agricultural areas or don't particularly eat 100% organic. Our dermatology study was done at UC Davis, which shows that it increases hydration and decreases acne blemishes. And the hepatoprotection of HU58, which shows that spores protect the liver from acetaminophen and liver toxicity. A triglyceride study showing that the spores decrease triglycerides by 34% in 90 days. And this is huge because we're looking at really pharmaceutical type of reductions here. Hepatic encephalopathy, and this was again using the HU58, showing that it reduces ammonia levels in patients, and because ammonia is extremely toxic for the liver and the brain. And then currently, these are the active studies. Our foundational metabolic endotoxemia study was 30 days. That's where we really saw the reduction of the lipopolysaccharide by 45% and the triglycerides. And so each one of the analytes we saw reduced, we started a separate clinical trial. But then it was increased to 90 days because more analytes came into significance, such as ghrelin and leptin. So that's why we have a weight loss study that's in process. We have a periodontal study going, a vaginal microbiome study, rheumatoid arthritis, cancer immunotherapy, immune modulation, secretory IgA, chronic inflammation, the leaky gut study. This one should have been done. COVID has slowed down this particular study, as many of the other studies that were targeted to be already finished by now. We have an ICU patient recovery antibiotic-associated diarrhea study that's in discussion. And of course, that 30-day metabolic endotoxemia is already published. Our cardiac output study is already published. And this has to do with our vitamin K2. There's a lot of research out on vitamin K2, but this area really hadn't been researched or published on. And that was that our K2 can increase cardiac output by 13%. And reduce blood volume, which is real important for those who can't exercise and need more, or have limited exercise and need more out of their workouts, or for athletes that are performing, and every edge makes a difference. And then the HU58 in immune function, and we'll go over that study as well, showing the decrease in IL-6 and TNF alpha by 45 and 50%, 55% respectively. So what really differentiates our approach is that we're looking at the terrain, that there is a community of these organisms in our gut, and that how they get along, who takes kind of a hierarchical charge. Is it a a give and take community, or is there a dictator that's really taken over and causing a lot of problems? So in our BiomeFX test, this is how we're different, and in our approach to our protocols, this is what we're looking at, that there are some pathogens that are part of our natural commensal environment, but because they're not causing any harm, and we have enough good gut bacteria and a healthy system keeping them in check, then we shouldn't try to eradicate them or go after them. So this is, again, how we differentiate from a lot of the other companies. So we have studied, and really what we've targeted in our gut healing protocol is what is the three primary aspects of a healthy gut. And we're looking at the first mucin layer, which is like a swimming pool of organisms, and this is represented in the different colors. So you have a high diversity with a lot of different organisms, you're going to have a healthier gut environment. You can see that there's lipopolysaccharide present, but it's not causing any problems. The IgG2, the secretory IgA is keeping it in check, and there's a healthy barrier here of the mucin 2. And this symbol here represents the keystone strains. There are certain strains that you were inoculated with by your mother that are really key to long-term health. And we'll go over some of those species in a minute. But those strains, again, when you're in developmental microbiology, as far as the microbiome goes, after 2.5 years, you have a mature microbiome. And there is we've dispelled the aspect of reseeding or replanting organisms into the gut. That opportunity, that window of opportunity closes. At that point, what we can affect the microbiome is by increasing those keystone strains, by creating an environment, by feeding them, by helping them thrive, and by decreasing overgrowth of pathogens. And that's really where that's where the megaspore shines, because it has a hierarchical quorum sensing, in that it's saying it's a chemical surveillance system. So when it's in the gut, it knows where it's at. That's how it knows where to colonize. It knows what other species are in the environment, and it knows their strain. So they know if they should create metabolites to help them grow and thrive, or if they should create antibiotics customized for those pathogens and go after them or competitively exclude them. And then the third area is this mucin 2 layer. And this is really important because it's this mucin 2 layer that protects the underlying brush border microvilli, the tight junctions, keeping the zonulin intact, making sure that no pathogens or food particles, that nothing breaches this border so that there's no immune reaction. Now, this is all in contrast to what we see over on the other side, which is most of the individuals that you're seeing, because leaky gut is endemic in our population. And here's what we're looking for. We see that in the mucin 1 layer that we have overgrowth of certain pathogens. That's creating an environment that causes additional pathogens to grow. We see that there's a lot of lipopolysaccharide, and that lipopolysaccharide is degrading or eating into this mucin 2 layer. And then when the mucin 2 layer is gone, now the epithelial cell wall is exposed, and the lipopolysaccharide can degrade and to damage the tight junctions, where now the pathogens, the lipopolysaccharide, the undigested food can all flood into the lumen of the cell, where the immune system recognizes the invasion and begins to arrest or to recognize. And this is where the immune cascade and all of the cytokines start reacting, and you have extreme inflammation. Now, just the process of eating causes small amounts of this happening. but it should never be chronic or ongoing. But unfortunately, there are most individuals having a chronic inflammatory response, which then feeds chronic illnesses. So when we look at this point right here, this is the genesis of most chronic illnesses. This is where autoimmune disease begins. So everything that we can do to prevent this from happening, we then can improve any of those conditions. And this is where we focused when we made our first publication, because we knew that if we could show that these spores made an improvement on this situation in metabolic endotoxemia, then every single chronic illness then could be improved. And since then, we've been looking at those analytes that also improved, such as triglycerides and ghrelin and insulin and glycogen and all of those, which just proves out that it's happening. When the gut is healing, chronic illnesses improve. So just in summary, the healthy gut will show increased microbial diversity, low levels of pathogens and toxins, a thick mucosal barrier, strong epithelial tight junctions, low mucosal inflammation. A damaged gut, and this usually happens because of use of antibiotics, alcohol, smoking, stress, lack of sleep, intense exercise, artificial sweeteners, saturated fats, glyphosate, pharmaceutical drugs, on and on and on, environmental toxins. And this is why most people are affected. Some of the points about megaspore you might not have realized. Of course, these are the individual species here. Each one of these species individually are used as pharmaceutical drugs in Europe and have been for the last 60 years. That's why we know they're incredibly safe and incredibly effective, but no one else had brought them into the US as an over-the-counter or nutraceutical product before microbiome labs. When you see 4 billion and you realize that there's a numbers game going on in the probiotic world, what you have to remember is that we know that these 4 billion make it to the small intestine. So that's the payload that's delivered and they colonize. If it's not a spore probiotic and it's not, we're 7 years ahead of the research in order to keep the spores in spore form and to make sure that they come out of spore form, then it doesn't matter if there's millions, billions, trillions, that the delivery is still zero. And there's none that colonize. Their effect is through metabolic signaling, which is small. There's no refrigeration required because we're not trying to keep spore, Lactobacillus bifidus, we're not trying to keep those alive. So if you're buying and you're refrigerating, it's an increased cost with no delivery of live organisms. So we have survival studies, so we show 100% survival, supports diversification and gut commensal flora. Like I said, you don't have to worry about introducing multiple different types of species because by increasing the metabolites in the environment that feed these keystone strains, they will increase by 45% with just the use of the spores. Controls bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, C. diff, all of those pathogens, and we target the specific keystone strains like Lactobacillus bifidus, Faecalibacteria, Akkermansia, so forth. Each one of our spores have a different function, a different role that they're playing, whether it's producing vitamins or enzymes or antibiotics or helping with the mucin layer or other. That's why we recommend if you start with a 1 spore probiotic, you want to increase to the second spore and then to the 5 spore probiotic just to reap the benefits of all 5 spores. The things that it does, improving innate and adaptive immunity. We've shown that infants that are born that are not exposed to spores will develop immune deficiencies. So they're very important for actually training our immune system. They help with the Treg cells in recognition of what's self and what's non-self, what's good and what's bad. And that's why, you know, individuals that are highly sensitive to foods and products, you know, that's a damaged immune system that the spores will help improve that recognition. The spores increase really all of the short chain fatty acids, one of the most important being the butyrate, helping with the intestinal barrier function, the efficacy during antibiotic therapy. And this is important to realize too, you can take these spores with antibiotics. They are protected by that spore, endospore. When they sense an assault in the microbiome, whether it's an antibiotic, pharmaceutical, or whether it's a natural antibiotic, an oregano or something that would, you know, disrupt the microbiome, they protect themselves by going back into the spore stage, wait for the assault to leave, and then they're right there to start sporulating or vegetating again, colonizing and cleaning up the damage. Okay. And gut reconditioning, this is, you know, our first R of our program, reconditioning, reinforcing, and repairing. Autoimmune conditions, food sensitivities, allergies, and inflammatory conditions. This is the first study that was published. This is the one that focused on that metabolic endotoxemia, that area of chronic inflammation. And this is where we're showing that 45% reduction in the spore-treated group. But unfortunately, we saw too, when you're not treating these individuals, the placebo group, their metabolic endotoxemia tends to get worse. And this is in a healthy population of college students. And so it's, again, an endemic problem in our population. This is a recent publication where we showed that the spores are, you know, an important treatment for IBS, which is what you would expect. Any chronic illness, any gut inflammatory condition is going to improve because we get at the source of the problem, and that's the metabolic endotoxemia. So this is the summary of that particular study, showing that the rifaximin plus the probiotic, low FODMAP, and the Megaspore were the three different control groups, and the summary was that Megaspore demonstrated the most profound improvement in the IBS severity score, and the spores subjects reported better general health and physical functioning, and the spores can reduce the dysbiosis to a similar degree as the antibiotic treatment. So this is really good news. It's very effective. This is another study showing that the bacillus spores protect against acetaminophen, damaged livers, and is just or more effective than milk thistle. And this is the summary there. This is the one spore probiotic that I discussed. It's just the Bacillus subtilis. It has slightly higher a CFU count, so it's very effective if you're trying to use a competitive exclusion protocol such as SIBO, C. diff, or you've got someone, you know, extremely, in an overgrowth situation. And in that case, the protocol that we use is we put all three of the different type of spores when they're in acute condition. So we'll use 2 Restore Flora at breakfast, 2 Megaspore at lunch, and 2 of these HU58 at dinner, and we'll do that for 30 days. And generally, in those severe conditions, that's going to be very effective. It doesn't really matter the order that you use those. The idea is the total CFU count, because what we're trying to do is outcompete the pathogens and really just force them out. This is a study that was just using the one spore probiotic and showing that it decreases the inflammation in general, specifically IL-6 by 45% and TNF-alpha by 55%. This is the 2 spore probiotic. Again, we use that in combination when we're trying to competitively exclude a pathogen, or we'll use it by itself if someone's very sensitive, their immune system is very damaged, and they can't tolerate all 5 spores. We'll start with a 1, 2, or starting with A258, graduating to the 2 spore, or just starting with the 2 spore. In some cases, it's still very well tolerated. We also recommend it when someone comes into your office and they tell you, oh, and by the way, I'm on a course of antibiotics. Well, you don't really have the time to do the titration of the megaspore. You don't know how they're going to respond. So this is very safe, and a conservative approach of just putting them, you have them on the spores. It's, like I said, very well tolerated, and you've got some Saccharomyces boulardii, because of the number 1 side effect usually that will come up after antibiotic use is candida infection or a yeast overgrowth. So many of our practitioners use this product in that way. So this is the Mega Prebiotic, and these specific oligosaccharides are going to feed just specific keystone strains. Now, the first question you're going to get once someone looks at the label is that the XOS is derived from non-GMO corn, and the GOS is derived from cow's milk. These are very highly refined. There are no proteins, there's no food particles in this formula, so there's no immunoreactions caused by those ingredients. But this is transparency. This is where they're coming from. The FOS is from green or gold and gold kiwi. And this is a very effective formula. So we've done a study on this, and here it is, showing that the Megaspore was very effective at jumpstarting those keystone strains, but it's the prebiotic that feeds them and helps them thrive. So it's really the difference between a 20% increase and an 80% increase. And again, we're focused on getting these keystone strains, because you'll see when we look at the BiomeFX stool kit how important these are to protecting the overall function of the gut. So Megaspore plus Megapre increased the short chain fatty acid production by 80 to 140%, which significantly increased the bifido, the lacto, the prevotella, and the Faecalibacteria perniciae. Significant reductions in pro-inflammatory bacteria like the dissolvable Vibrio, the enterobacterial, and the Pseudomonas. Okay, so the Mega Mucosa has several ingredients, one of which is the IgG 2000, which we sell as a standalone, because some people need a pre-treatment of IgG 2000 because they're so toxic. And this ingredient has been on the market a very long time. It was the flagship product that launched Zymogen, for instance. Right now, we're the only company that has a contract with them. Oh, actually 2. There is another company. And this product actually saved the livestock industry in America. And there's a whole history on that. So it's very effective. And here are some of the, there's a lot of studies on it as well. Very effective at neutralizing harmful pathogens like bacteria, viruses, environmental toxins. It binds and eliminates unwanted toxins like lipopolysaccharide. So that's how we use it, to modulate the immune system and bind toxins. And this is just a diagram of how that works. When you're increasing these specific immunoglobulins, you're able to give secretory IgA a break so it can work more effectively. And these are all the studies that have been done on IgG 2000. So that's the first ingredient in our Mega Mucosa. The second are specific amino acids that help mucin 2 barrier repair. It helps by feeding the goblet cells. And we have research to support that those specific amino acids increase the mucin 2 production by 95%. And it contains citrus polyphenols that shuts down that immune cascade. And it helps increase short chain fatty acid production as well. Here's the study. The amino acids are the L-theanine, serine, proline, and cysteine. And again, it increases the colonic mucin synthesis by 95%. So this is a study just reinforcing the importance of the gut epithelial barrier and how it's involved in IBD, autoimmune disease, and systemic infection. And at that very point I was pointing out in the damaged gut, at the genesis of autoimmune disease, it, again, reinforces the connection. So that was a review of your total gut restoration, the ingredients, and just focusing on the benefits and aspects of those products. And I'm going to go quickly over this since you already use the products for that purpose. The Megaspore for the reconditioning to start with, the Mega Probiotic, the prebiotic to help feed those specific keystone strains in the 2nd month, and then the Mega Mucosa in that 3rd month. Now, Mega Guard, as I mentioned before, is one of my favorite products, just because we're recognizing the importance of the artichoke or really just moving sluggish bile. There's a book written called Phase 2.5 Detoxification by Kelly Halterman that has now designated an entire detoxification step just for bile and the importance of bile. So again, if you have a dysbiotic gut, it will unconjugate bile, release those toxins and recycle them. And with someone who has a damaged gut, it's going to be highly irritating and either cause severe constipation or severe diarrhea. The licorice is patented, and it's very specific. This high flavonoid licorice stops the protein synthesis of H. pylori. So it keeps H. pylori in check, and the ginger is very effective as for motility, both of the stomach and the upper digestive tract. So if you have someone that has any type of dysbiosis, dyspepsia or GERD or gas, bloating, constipation, look to this product here. It's been very helpful in those situations. This just repeats what I just said. So indigestion, GERD, dyspepsia, ulcers, nausea. Gut Guard, and that's, again, each one of those ingredients is patented for their specific role. This is the licorice bioflavonoids with great studies showing how it rebalances H. pylori and alleviates functional dyspepsia for acid reflux, stomach ulcers, gastric mucosal inflammation. And this highlights the studies. And this is the artichoke, also very protective of the liver. It stimulates bile flow, facilitates toxin removal. And then the ginger. This is the component that helps with the nausea, the upset stomach. It's also anti-inflammatory. And we use this as part of our SIBO protocols. Now, this is the Mega Omega that I said. It's a lot of companies they sell fish oils, but since so many of our practitioners were recommending fish oils, we really wanted to focus on one that was going to have good research showing it does reduce inflammation in the GI tract. So this is why we chose this one. You can see we have quantitated these PRMs, and we've also quantitated the DHA, or the DPA, which you'll see those two aspects are not in other fish oils, or very many. And that's what makes this fish oil special. And it's got all the right certifications and QA/QCs. And we recognize the importance of these fish oils, brain injuries, lowering inflammation, intestinal alkaline phosphatase. Not many companies really talk about the pro-resolving mediators, but those are the pro-inflammatory mediators that the higher you have in these fish oils, the more effective it's going to work for inflammation. And then here are the schematics, just breaking down the biochemical reactions. And PRMs are what can be blocked by stress, disease, and genetics and lifestyle. And then, of course, we have the studies to show these specific reactions. And again, our company, we're highly focused on anything that is going to help with lipopolysaccharide. And again, that's why we've chosen this particular fish oil, because you have to consult someone on an anti-inflammatory diet, and fish oils is definitely part of that. This is the Megamica balance that I'd mentioned, the undecanoic acid. This is a derivative from castor oil beans, very antifungal, been used for, the yeast family and fungal family, mold family, and then the bee propolis. And this is why beehives, don't get overgrown in mold, because propolis is very antifungal and anti-inflammatory as well. And we're very familiar with the symptoms of Candida. And again, Candida is one of those things that's very endemic in our population. And here's a good time to just make a point of warning. When you're dealing with yeast, with this product or any other product or protocol, especially if someone has had chronic yeast in the past, that the reactions can be very severe. Typically, detoxing the exotoxins of Candida will find the weak link in the individual's detoxification pathways. And I would say when I was a practitioner, the worst reaction I ever saw was a Candida detoxification where she detoxed through her skin and it looked like she was burned over her entire body. So it's real important to just keep those things in mind, that wherever the weak link is, Candida will find it. It's very, obvious, in some cases with oral thrush or with dandruff or with vaginitis, with different types of athlete's foot or jock itch. But I would just put caution there, start very slowly, support the detoxification pathways. And I would also note too that I've noticed in women, especially, that when you detox from Candida too quickly, because a lot of these exotoxins have innervated in the nervous system, a lot of women will have emotional reactions. And I've seen from, extreme aggravation to just melting in a puddle of emotion. So just fair warning, you want to be careful when it comes to Candida. And this is why it's so harmful, is those hypha, which are like roots, will attach to the epithelial cells and destroy those tight junctions, and they dig in like roots. So that's why the undecanoic acid is so effective. It stops the formation of this hypha, and then the Candida can't attach. Now the wheat rescue, here are the ingredients. You'll see that it has two of our spores. It has Saccharomyces boulardii. It has these very strong enzymes that break down the gluten and gliadin proteins so that into less than 8 amino acids, so they're no longer immunoreactive. And this is reinforcing that there's a lot of hidden gluten in our food. The wheat and gluten causes a lot of inflammation. Celiacs are highly reactive to it. And a point to when you put someone on a gluten-free diet, many times these folks were receiving a lot of their nutrients from the fortified wheat products that they were consuming. And they've shown that when they're put on a gluten-free diet without supplementing those missing nutrients, many of these individuals have problems because of that. So I just put that out there for you to be conscious of what might be taken away from their diet that they're receiving from the wheat products that you want to supplement. And this is just repeating that protein degradation so that you're not going to have an immune reaction. And I think you're probably all very versed in the gluten problem in itself and what it does to the tight junctions and damage to the epithelial and the problems associated, the symptoms. With some people, it's very severe with diarrhea, abdominal pains, bloating, skin malabsorption, weight loss, or unintended weight loss, and the intolerance with celiac. And we went over the ingredients already. Okay, and this is the megaquinone. You'll see that it's a very unique product in that we know the gut microbiome itself uses menaquinone in their mitochondria. So if you're taking any type of vitamin K that has less than 100 micrograms, it's going to the gut microbiome and it's never reaching the host. So that's the first point to recognize, that you need at least 300 micrograms to get past the gut microbiome and be available for the host in systemic circulation. The second is that there's not all vitamin K2s are stable. So this is a very important point. And our menaquinone is the most stable on the market. It is a patented form. So that's important. We ferment our vitamin K2 using our Bacillus subtilis spore. And we do that on chickpeas. So there's no dairy, there's no soy, and you might read the label on some of those other fermentation products that you might be surprised what it's being fermented on. So just ours is chickpeas, ours is strong, and ours is stable. And best of all, it performs very well. And you'll see, again, it removes calcium from tissues and our arteries. It halts bone mineralization loss. It protects the brain, the nervous health from reactive oxygen species. It induces apoptosis in vitro leukemic cells, reduces risk of prostate and liver cancers, improves insulin sensitivity after 4 weeks of supplementation, enhances male fertility by increasing testosterone production, and I might add, the sperm motility. And then here's, basically going into the reactions, that these receptors on the matrix GLA proteins are all vitamin K2 dependent. So again, it's important, but it's K2, it's K1 that's involved in blood clotting factors, which is liver dependent. K2 is not, it's, extrahepatic, and it's involved in the osteocalcin and bone formation, and it's involved in the soft tissue, making sure that the calcium is ionized and returned to the bone. And this, again, another way of illustrating that. And so wherever you have calcium deposition, the tissue is not going to work as well. So we've got great studies showing that plaquing in the brain can lead to Parkinson's. Of course, plaquing in the pancreas interferes with insulin production, in the testes interferes with sperm production. So all of these areas, calcium deposition is also, an aspect of aging. As we age, we are becoming more and more rigid, basically a kind of slow turning to bone or aspect or stone. Now we have two different formulas, because this formula here does not have K1 in it. The other formula has some K1 in it because the body spares K1. If you're deficient in K1, your body will convert your K2 to K1. And we have some absorption minerals of magnesium and zinc this one is just K2. So if you have people on other forms where they're getting other supplements where they're getting plenty of magnesium, zinc, and K1, then this would not be doubling up on that. And also, if you don't want to go down the road of someone on a blood thinner, you can just tell them, K2, as long as it's, not a K1 agonist, then there's no problem. Here's the study. We focus specifically on cardiac output and blood volume. And this goes through that study. And the results were an increase of cardiac output by 13% and blood volume significantly. So great reasons on top of all of these others recommended for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, bone breaks, some cancers, as we mentioned before. And then this shows the difference again in those two products. And then last but not least, Phytospore. And I can tell you that some of our cat lovers are giving Phytospore to them until we come up with a specific label for cats. But already receiving some good testimonials back, some dogs that had wounds that wouldn't heal, and some vets that after using the Phytospore had rapid wound healing. So all good things. So if you've got dogs that have issues with the GI tract, gas, bloating, this is a great product for them. Because everyone wants to take care of their fur babies. So it's recommended for atopic dermatitis, allergies, food sensitivities, the gas, the loose stools, poor wound healing, heat spots, and behavior issues. And improves food intake. Yeah, so good stuff there. And this is so you where that metabolic endotoxemia study is being conducted. This seems to be a renowned place where most dog studies take place. They're focused on that. Okay. Yeah, so here's the preliminary results from that study already, that it's reducing lipopolysaccharide by 20% in healthy dogs and 45% in dogs with dysbiosis. Okay, and this is just, again, talking about the action of each of those ingredients. The Pediococcus is specific for dogs because the #1 reason dogs end up going to the vet is because of skin conditions. So this has a lot of research showing how, and these are the mechanisms, how that organism helps. Okay, so that is the end of the product information. And this is the information on our stool test. So there's a current technology that most stool tests are utilizing, which is called 16S. Ours is different in that ours is referred to as shotgun metagenomic sequencing. Another way to say that is whole genomic sequencing. And I'll explain the difference and what that means. Again, one of our founders, Kieran, he was really focused on finding an accurate, reliable, functional stool test. And that's what I'm going to show you today, why we chose this stool test, how it's different from others, and review what the sample report looks like. And so we're focused on the effectiveness, the functionality, and to make sure that it fills a need. Did the world need another stool test out there? And we determined it did. So what's important to compare stool tests when you're looking at apples to apples is the specificity and the sensitivity, the data and analytics, Is it reliable? Can you do the test on a Monday and a Tuesday and a Wednesday and get similar results? The interpretation and how does it translate to your patient? And is there functional information that you can work with? So our search, we did a global search for the most accurate, reliable functional test, and we found that Cosmos ID was that test, and that's why we partnered with them. So it has the highest degree of accuracy in the market. It has many competencies in place to prevent bias. It has reference ranges based on 426 healthy subjects. It has the world's largest database with over 160,000 microbe genomes. It has functional insights on how these microbes and hosts interact. It has had third-party testing, and it's GLA and GLP certified. And you'll see what they have that other stool tests don't have is they're the ones that are being used across all of these disciplines. So as far as pharma and clinical laboratories, nutritional laboratories, agricultural research centers, consumer labs, government agencies, they're using this type of test. Anything else does not have, is not cutting edge enough. Now, here's one of the differentiating points from us and the other tests is when you're trying to identify organisms, you've got to be able to identify down to an individual. And for instance, this is showing humans versus a bacteria. So you've got these taxonomy ranges from kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and then strain. Now for a human, you could put our social security number in there because that's identifying us as an individual. Whereas a bacteria, the strain is their social security number, basically. And this is important to get to that because you can get down to, say, a bacteria of Escherichia coli, but the difference in strains can be either the difference between a commensal and a hemorrhagic Escherichia. So that's why it's important. And only whole genomic sequencing can get you to that strain level. Now, the other technology, the current testing is 16S, and we'll talk about what that means. So it's the most popular and current methodology on the market. It looks at the genus level, species, instead of the species level. Only covers 1 to 2 hyperavailable regions on a genome. It gives a hyperavailable region, does not capture all the bacterial lineage equally well. So it's taking a section, it's using PCR, amplifying it, and that's on the RNA. So as an example, if you only have a few amplicons, then you're taking pieces that can come together as an identity, but you can't completely identify it. So at that point, then you have to guess. So you've amplified parts of the genes, you've artificially amplified some. This is a very high false positive rate. You can't identify viruses, fungi, and protists. You cannot identify the functional interferences, and you cannot identify antibiotic resistances. So what we have offered instead is a complete identification. When you have end-to-end sequencing of DNA, you can see the entire organism. You're able to analyze at the species and strain level, you can identify those bacteria, virus, fungi, and protists, and it is the most accurate testing on the market at 99% specificity and 95% sensitivity. And if you don't know this individual here, this is our microbiologist, Kiran Krishnan. So we can summarize some of the points here. Most of we covered as far as accuracy, DNA capture, functional reporting, actionable outcomes, customized lifestyle and dietary recommendations. And this is really exciting. As this test is evolving, we're getting information that no other company is able to provide. So we'll go over some of those highlights. Okay, so if we start again, kind of the 30,000 foot level, we're going to talk about phylum. And the first thing you'll see in our sample report is it's like you're looking into someone's microbiome, and you're going to be able to see phylum-wise kind of the biggest segments, the biggest groupings of these bacteria. And you've probably heard about ratios between Bacteroides and Firmicutes. The reason this gets a lot of people's attention is because this is the first ratio that really can help individuals target weight control, because it's very well documented that if you have more Firmicutes in your gut, it's going to be harder for you to lose weight. So that's the first ratio here that's real obvious. So in the healthy gut population, visually, you would have less Firmicutes and more Bacteroides. This is a sample that was submitted, and you can see they have a problem. They've got too many Firmicutes and not enough Bacteroides. And then this is another way of really illustrating it pictorially. And it's showing that of the phylum they have very few in the right place, and they're missing somewhere in a very low quantity that they should have. And then this is just more resolution. And again, phyla is the biggest group of bacteria, and it's a good visual for reference. And then the next group is looking at the family level. And again, visually you can see in a healthy population, we see that just the ratios are off. You've got, not enough of this, not enough here, too much of this. So again, you can see there's not a match. And then, representing it visually here, we want to be in the green. We don't have the diversity where we should. Okay, but this is an overall index that you will get that can guide you just right off the bat, is how many of these modules are in balance. So the first one is showing that anything above 30 is going to be good. So we realize this is a healthy subject that they're giving us as an example. It's broken down into alpha diversity, beta diversity, and the resistome. And this is very unique. This is pointing out how resilient is your microbiome to infection. So the first index is a calculation of the first four modules: diversity and resistance and pathogen. Now, there is a training series that goes into each one of these modules given by Kieran himself, and it takes listening to these modules a couple of different times from different people to really let it soak in. And remember, this is the cutting edge research that you'll see if you read any of the research papers, or you're interested in microbiome science. These are using the scattergrams that they use in their publications, and it does take a while to get used to looking at this data presented in this way. So the first, alpha diversity, what you're looking at is species richness. Average diversity of a species in your gut. So if you have low alpha diversity, it suggests that you've been exposed to antibiotics, stress, toxin, dietary factors, and it's really, cut down on the number of organisms that should be in your gut, and that some pathogens have taken over. So high alpha diversity, you're going to have an improved resilience or resistance, in your microbiome, and this is tied to longevity and how you're going to defend yourself from chronic conditions as you age. And so it's linked to short chain fatty acid production and overall metabolic production. Where beta diversity has to do with the composition, and this is really talking about the ecology of your gut. The composition, species compared to a healthy population. So the red dot, which is right here, is right in the center of the bullseye. And this is right where it should be for someone who's healthy. That it's saying that individuals in the same geographic area, eating relatively, the same way, you're falling right in line with that. If it was off in one of these other quadrants, then you'd have an issue. You could have a lot of species, but they don't fit where you live. So high diversity means it's in the center of the cluster, compositional similarity, successful for coexisting with the environment. If it's low beta diversity or it's not in the cluster, then you've got compositional dissimilarity, or you're not able to adapt and coexist in the environment that you live. And then the other module, the gut resistome index. This is talking about how does your community of organisms get along with each other. So it's measuring the resistance that each bacteria has to one another. It indicates uniformity, stability, equilibrium within the microbiome. So another way to describe it, it's an economy. All these organisms are producing products for each other, vitamins, nutrients that they feed on. They also have ammunition. So they produce antibiotics. And so they're going to feed their friends and they're going to defend against their enemies. So when you put all of that together, is this community overall getting along, or has a dictator taken over and started, changing the environment? And this is the pathobiome. So it's going to identify, 36 different pathogens, yeasts, protozoas, so forth. And then it will tell you, it's not just giving you a +1, +2. It's actually quantitating this amount. And this is also very different than other stool tests. And then it's going to give you nutritional information, how you can improve this organism's, improve the environment to make it not conducive for this organism. And then in the keystone strains, you'll see dietary recommendations to improve the environment, to encourage the organism. Lifestyle recommendations, and then supplement recommendations. And here's some of the other pathogens that it has found. This example is showing H. pylori, Clostridia. Then we look at the dysbiosis ratios. The first we already discussed, and that was the Firmicutes versus the Bacteroides. And again, the Firmicutes are mostly your gram-negative species, your Clostridias, your Staphylococcus, Streptococcuses, and they're going to be more associated with diabetes and obesity. Whereas your Bacteroides are going to be your more gram-negative organisms of your Prevotella, the ones that produce short-chain fatty acids. And this is going to be more typical in individuals with lean body mass and better metabolism. Another important ratio, the Proteobacteria to Actinobacteria. Proteobacteria are going to be associated with Shigella and Klebsiella. The Actinobacteria are going to be more associated with the Proteobacteria, which combat parasites and fungal overgrowths. And then the last ratio is the Prevotella to bacteria. And Prevotella is known for producing high lipopolysaccharide. So you're going to have more inflammation when you have more of those species. We look at the ammonia producing versus the ammonia clearing. We look at the estrobolome, the sulfate reduction bacteria, and the methanogen producing bacteria. And if you're doing any type of hormone replacement or hormone balancing, this is going to be real important for you to look at. There's 26 different bacteria that produce beta-glucuronidase that unconjugate estrogen and recycle it, creating estrogen dominance. So if you're giving hormones and you haven't helped the gut, then you're increasing their estrogen dominance and estrogen clearance and causing problems. This section is on the keystone strains. And again, we do a lot to encourage these keystone strains with our prebiotic, with, Megaspore, with all of the different products really are focused, because long term, when you have strong keystone strains, they are going to maintain the health of your gut long term. So Akkermansia, this is one of our favorite. It is a fat-burning organism, and it likes to grow during fasting. So that's why we encourage intermittent fasting. Ficalum prunitii fights inflammation, so we want to encourage that one. And here's, there's a lot of studies to show that, this is really in the name, Akkermansia musciphylla. It's mucin loving. It's a primary mucin degrader, or excuse me, mucus. So mucus is bad, mucin is good. So you can see this is helping with that, as well as higher the Akkermansia, lower the obesity, better the metabolic function, better the intestinal permeability. The Faecalibacterium, like I said, it's very anti-inflammatory and also helps with mucosal homeostasis and associated with improving chronic inflammatory and autoimmune diseases. Okay, so since those modules were all launched in January, and here's some of the facts about that. The cost of the test is $299, but as we're launching more modules, we add to your existing samples you've submitted at no charge. So you're really able to learn as you go along, and we have the video modules. We also have experts on staff. So when you get a sample report, you can sit down, go over it with an expert, so you feel very competent in interpreting those results for your patient. And then just to show you some of the new features that have been added, and they'll be ready at the end of August. We're also going to have drop shipping directly to patients available at the end of August. So, these features are all being beta tested still, just to work out any bugs, but it's going to be very helpful for you. Then you, of course, have access to any of these presentations that you would like. These are the individual modules on the video modules. They go over the limitations of the tests, the comparison to others, and it goes through the report section by section with Kieran, our microbiologist. And then we have this link here for you to set up those reviews, consultations with the experts. And I like, each time you hear a different way to describe diversity, there's certain things that will resonate with you that help you. Some people like to describe alpha diversity as the quantity, beta diversity as the quality. I like to use, questions. How many species inhabit your gut is alpha diversity. Do the right species inhabit your gut is the beta diversity. The resistome, again, that's the economics, and talking about the stability, uniformity, the competition. Basically, how well are they all getting along with each other? In the pathobiome, we discussed, that it's identifying these organisms. And what we have found is that the genetic sequences of some of the pathogens that other stool tests claim that they're identifying have not even been sequenced yet. So that brings into question, are they really accurate identifications? We went over the dysbiosis ratios, the gases, the importance of the estrobolome if you're dealing with hormones. This is more of a exhaustive list of the keystone strains. Now, this is what the new modules are going to include. It's going to have modules on saccharolytic or carbohydrate fermentation and proteolytic fermentation or protein. So you're going to be able to see if the diet the individual is consuming is working well for their gut bacteria. So really, it's our gut bacteria that the efficiency of how they metabolize our nutrients that should determine what type of diet that we consume. And our gut bacteria have certain preferences. So you'll be able to see if a person is on any extreme diet, whether it's from the one end of the spectrum of veganism to the other end of the spectrum of being a complete carnivore, is that diet working for their gut bacteria? And that's what that module will tell you. It's also going to break down the individual short chain fatty acids and show you those organisms in your gut that are producing the most important short chain fatty acids or not. And this just goes over how important short chain fatty acids are. It's going to do, TMA, which can be converted to TMAO in the liver and is a very detrimental to the cardiovascular system. It's going to show you if you have the bacteria that break down and conjugate your bile salts and recycle toxins. And here's my favorite. It's going to show you which organisms are producing your neurotransmitters and your hormones. And there's no other company out there right now that's really giving you this very important aspect. We know that 90% of our serotonin is made in the gut, but in fact, the serotonin is made by our gut bacteria. So if you don't have the gut bacteria that are supposed to be making the serotonin, this is going to put you at an extreme disadvantage. Same with the neurotransmitters. Yep, and I just reversed that. Sorry, serotonin is a neurotransmitter. And then the hormones are specifically produced by certain bacteria. And this is a scientific paper that just goes very detailed into which neurotransmitter and which hormone are made by which organism. But this is, again, it's easy to look at in the sample report. And then, so far, I wanted to show some extreme cases of what you might see. This is an example, say, of a woman with Hashimoto's disease and who's been on some antibiotics. She's taken some Hist-AO, and right away we can see her beta diversity is in the wrong quadrant. You can see that she has some pathogens showing up, some Clostridia and some Campylobacter. Now this is extreme. However, you can look in that 30,000 foot and you see that the entire species population of Bacteroides is hardly there, and it's completely overgrown with the Firmicutes. And then this estrobolome, so she's recycling estrogen. And then, very important, we see in the keystone strains, there's many that just aren't even there. So she has no protection from those pathogens. Okay, so the findings were loss of beneficial bacteria, excessive growth of potentially harmful organisms, loss of overall microbial diversity, excessive Firmicutes, so it's going to be really hard for her to lose weight, and prone to estrogen dominance. And then the recommendations that the report would give is increasing the plant fibers, resistant starches, anti-inflammatory fats, gluten-free, dairy-free, moderate protein intake, support liver and bile with the artichoke leaf extract, increase the omega-3 supplementation in EPA, some herbs, spices to help with the inflammation, recondition the gut with the spores, bind the toxins with the IgG2000, and really use that Mega-Pre to help those keystone strains. Another example is an 11-year-old female with neurological problems, behavior and sensory issues, sensitivity to light, constipation, limited diet. And how many kids have you seen that fall into this category? And we know the gut-brain connection is so important. And this goes over the biochemistry. And these travel up through the vagus nerve and enter the nervous system. So the first thing we see, just like the other poor beta diversity but extremely poor alpha diversity. So most of her, good gut bacteria are not going to be there. A lot of a lot of pathogens, Candida, Klebsiella, Escherichia coli. And then when we look at these ratios, the important bacteria ratios, we see again an imbalance, but this is off the chart. This Proteobacteria to Actinobacteria. And you can see it when you look at the Proteobacteria, this small blue bar, but in her sample, it's completely taken over. Now, we'd mentioned before all the things that lipopolysaccharide can interfere with. And here's a list of it. So when you have individuals that have difficulty losing weight, chronic constipation, mood and appetite disorders, and there's depression is listed twice because it affects it in two different ways, two different neurotransmitters that are affected, cognitive decline, memory loss, anorexia, anxiety, chronic pain, Parkinson's, hypogonadism, and autoimmunity, all of those can be traced back to lipopolysaccharide in the gut. So more than likely, anytime you're going to have a die-off reaction or you're going to have a side effect, think, how can you neutralize the lipopolysaccharide? Here's some another diagram to just basically show you, here's where the bacteria should be, but obviously there's a lot of imbalances. And so many keystone strains that are just not there. So the findings are that lipopolysaccharide must be lowered. The inflammation must be lowered. The leaky gut must be attended to. The constipation is most likely from the lipopolysaccharide. The overall, you have to improve the overall diversity, eradicate the pathogens, and help the commensal organisms. So the recommendations are the megaspore, the spores in general, neutralized with the IgG2000 immunoglobulins, the omega fatty acids, perhaps some N-acetylcysteine or glutathione for the inflammation and the radical damage that's going on. Support nutrient deficiency. More likely there's some methylation issues going on. Use the mega prebiotic to help the keystone strains, support the liver, and help with the phases of detoxification, and of course, put her on a glyphosate-free organic diet. So that really concludes all that I have for you, and I'm hoping you've made a list of questions for me. So I will take you off of mute and open up the floor here. Where's everybody? Oh no.